Frank Seravalli is here, and he is going to be joining us, and I'm very excited about this. We can bring him in. We've got a low sponsor count today. Everybody complains about the ad reads, except Logan Van Dyke. There is going to have a lot that are popping up on YouTube. But anyways, Frank, thank you so much for joining us. Filip Hronek, what's his next contract going to come in at? Is it going to be with the Canucks?
I told you guys all along, and I've been super consistent in saying this. Filip Hronek's next deal will start with an 8. I don't know if it's going to be in Vancouver, but it'll start with an 8.
Yes. So that's kind of what we're all talking about today, Frank. And it's been a topic in this market for a while now. And yes,
wait. Let me guess. Yep. It's been a topic in your market because Pettersson signed, and now you guys don't have anything else to talk about.
Okay, yeah, sure. You can pull the whole media thing, but we saw the reports right away that as soon as Pettersson was done, Patrick Allvin and his management group went out and they said they want to get Hronek done. We know that.
Who reported that their spies saw Hronek's agent Alan Walsh and Patrick Allvin talking in LA during practice?
I can't remember. Was it you?
Yeah, it was me.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
I mean, it's an obvious next course of business. You get Pettersson done. Who's the next biggest guy on the list? Filip Hronek.
Knowing Jim Rutherford, if this becomes a difficult negotiation, do you think he's the type of manager that would look at that and go, all right, we're going to explore other options in terms of perhaps seeing if there's a market for him or seeing what other defensemen might be available? Or do you think they're married and tied to this player because of what they originally gave up for him and because overall he's had a pretty good first year in Vancouver?
Well, I heard you guys talking about potentially some of the negatives of Filip Hronek, but one thing that kind of stands out to me, and I know that there's more layers to this given Rick Tocchet and his influence and the structure and everything else that's been in play, but a lot of the same pieces were already in place last year for this team. Pettersson was here. Demko was here. Hughes was here. I mean, Miller was here. Like, there's only a few additional outliers. And, you could talk about the bottom 6 and the players that they brought in and a couple of the other defensemen that have been beneficial. But Hronek, to me, at least in terms of looking at their play, and I understand what you're saying about him driving his own pair. I think it's been mutually beneficial for both Quinn Hughes and Filip Hronek, not just a one-sided part of this. This has been the best partner that Quinn Hughes has had by a wide margin. And Filip Hronek, if you look at his numbers, like throughout his career, he's almost always consistently been a half point per game defenseman. The fact that 35 of his 45 points this year at even strength, and he's about to surpass at even strength alone his previous career point totals, and you mentioned the lack of PP1 time that he gets, like to me, like where are you going to find another right shot D that fits this well with your superstar defenseman?
That's a really good point. I think that's kind of what Canucks fans are trying to figure out, and that's what we were trying to figure out earlier in the show. Are there any other names you think that are going to be out there? Like, we saw John Marino. That was one Harm brought up. Are there going to be any other names this offseason that you think could be on the move to kind of, be in that competition with Filip Hronek?
To be honest, I haven't done a deep enough dive yet on what the market looks like this summer. I'm still digging out of trade deadline. Just got back from GM meetings. And at some point in the next couple of weeks, I'll put out my top 50 free agents and we'll go from there and I'll begin to really analyze it. But in terms of the Canucks and from Hronek's perspective, it's a really interesting spot because I think one key point to look at here is what is Filip Hronek's arbitration number if it were to get to that point, which I think would be a really tough spot for the Canucks. Really not unlike the Pettersson situation. If he goes to ARB, he's looking at a 1-year deal that then walks him to free agency. And you mentioned what they gave up to get him, which I think you have to keep in mind. But as best I can tell from looking at that situation, his pure counting stats, minutes played, all those things, he's looking at like somewhere between 7.5 and 8 on a pure arb case, a 1-year deal. Why would he take less than that on an 8-year deal when you know that the cap's going up by leaps and bounds after that? And more than that, if you're looking at it solely from Hronek's perspective, as good as the fit has been in Vancouver, and by the way, I think he loves it, and I think everything to this point has been extremely positive. He's 1 year away from being able to call his own shot. He can pick his team. He can pick his dollars. He's tantalizingly close to free agency at a time when he's played really well. What's the incentive to take, a major discount on what would already be a pretty high ARB number? Like, that's the part that I think people and fans get twisted about, is they don't like the idea, and people have bristled at the idea of every time that I've been saying this since October, that his number starts with an 8. People are like, oh, that's way too much. Can't pay him more than Quinn Hughes. Like, well, that's what the market bears. And that's what the market is going to bear moving forward. That, you might say, hey, 8 million a year. Like, let's just hypothetically say it's 8 times 8. You're going to say right now, probably fair for both player and team. But the longer that 8-year deal goes on, as the cap climbs north of $100 million, 8 suddenly begins to look team friendly at year 3 when he's 29 years old. So I still think that this is going to surprise people in terms of how it plays out. Everyone to this point has knocked me, laughed at me, whatever it is that I'm just looking at it from a pure number standpoint. And, I, as I've done many times, just ring up another team and ask them what the ARB number is for Filip Hronek's deal. And they'll tell you every time right around 775. So I can't imagine the deal coming in less than that.
Frank, you brought up the Elias Pettersson contract there, and I found that interesting. Obviously, you were right on top of the Pettersson contract. I did tell the story on the show, just so you know, of when I got the frantic call from you telling me that you were about to report that it was an 8-year deal. So obviously you were right on top of that. You nailed that deal.
I love that you were, wait, when I called you, by the way, you were like, right now? Like, you want me to go to my computer right now? And I was like, look, buddy, I don't care what you do. Go to your computer or not. I'm just giving you a heads up. I'm about to tweet this.
And for people in the market, they'll know this. I was on the phone with Bob Marjanovic, Moj from the market here. I was on the phone with Moj talking fantasy baseball, and we were in a really good conversation. And then you said, call me right now. I said, I'm just on a call. Just give me a second. You said, no, right now. And I rushed to my phone. I had to hang up on the Moj, and I feel bad about that, but he got it. He understands exactly why.
It was really funny though. Like, I call him and I'm like, hey, I need to talk to you. And you go, now? And I'm like, right now. I think I sent back like capital letters, like, right now.
Yes, exactly. So yes, you were on top of that deal. The reason I brought that up is because, how similar are these cases? Like, maybe similar, just comparables that you see between these negotiations, between these situations with Pettersson and now with Hronek for the Canucks.
Only similar in the sense that they were both 1 year remaining under team control. That's really the only similarity. Obviously, different positions, both premium positions, depending on, who you talk to. Some say center more valuable than right shot D. Some say right shot D more valuable than center. Either way, Pettersson obviously in a bit of a different category in terms of impact, superstar, all those things that go with his game. But that said, I don't see any difficulty here. And there's, as I've pointed out in the beginning, there's been so much breathless conjecture. Oh, he rejected this. The original offer was this. From what I can tell, like, all of that is wildly inaccurate. And I don't think they've gotten anywhere past a preliminary cordial conversation. And then wherever it goes from here, I think the focus has been on having him, finish off what has been a great first full season with the team.
You were, of course, at NHL GM meetings recently. Forget what the GMs have been discussing in terms of rule changes. If Gary Bettman went to you and said, you can implement one rule change, whether it's with the game itself or standings, whatever it is, what would your rule change be?
Aside from taking the Arizona Coyotes and moving them to Salt Lake City, can I
mean, you can talk
restructure
about
the
that
league?
too.
Yeah, we can get to that in a second. My one playing rule change is really simple. I coach minor hockey here in the US, and we've got an entire generation of players that are growing up not being allowed to ice the puck on the penalty kill. And it still blows my mind that you can not ice the puck while you're at even strength, but you can commit an infraction and be sent to the box, and then suddenly you're allowed to do something that previously you're no longer allowed to do. Doesn't compute. I've heard some fun takes on this in just chatting with some executives around the league the last couple of days, because I bounced my little stupid idea off of them, and they said, well, what happens if we put it in a spot where you're allowed to ice it one time on a penalty kill, and then the second time you ice it, it's another minor penalty, which would put you down at 5-on-3. And then if you do it a third time on the same kill, that it becomes a penalty shot. And I was like, man, that would be some interesting strategery when it comes to killing off situations, particularly late in games. But either way, like I said, players are forced at this, all age groups in the US, not at junior hockey or in the NCAA, but to really make creative plays with the puck when you're on the kill. And I can't believe that at the NHL level, we can't force pros to do the same thing.
I love it. What do you think of the actual proposed changes that we've heard? Like, obviously, we were talking with Carson Soucy today, and he said he got a warning in their last game about having his leg hanging over the bench. So they're already dishing out the warnings to players. But the one that we're really asking about is the challenges on high stakes. I really like the rule.
I mean, it's really minor because I actually have the data in front of me. There were only 2 mistakes, I think. Let me just double check the high sticking. This is actually pucks out of play. There were 234 penalties last year and only 2 incorrect calls. But the same rule applies to both pucks out of play and friendly fire high sticks. In that, first off, there's not very many mistakes. These officials actually do a pretty good job on those 2 fronts. And 2, I don't know how often they're going to be challenged, because you better get it right. Because if the challenge is unsuccessful, not only does the original penalty stick, but then you're now in a 5-on-3 situation for a full 2 minutes. And that could be enough to swing a game, quite honestly. So I don't know exactly what the stats are on teams and their success rate at 5-on-3 for a full 2 minutes, but I'd have to imagine it's north of 50%.
Rick Tocchet would say there's been a lot of misses this year. I think he's a big fan of this rule, and he's suggested that if a guy gets caught snapping his head and it was a phantom high stick, that guy should get a penalty. That's a very sensitive topic for Rick Tocchet. He's talked about it a lot in this market so far.
Well, guys are it's amazing just watching. So at the GM meetings, they actually bring us into the room and we sit at the table, and they've got the screens in front of us that the managers are looking at, and they rolled some clips for us, and they showed us one, like, just examples that they used to highlight. There was one where Adam Fox got a high stick in the face from a teammate, and like you would have thought that he was shot. Like it looked and felt like it barely grazed him, but it's the whole, like, neck goes back, everything dramatic. And I get the idea of trying to sell it, but man, some of them are just not a good look.
Did you learn anything about Arizona's future at the GM meetings, and what's your take around the whole Salt Lake City angle as well?
So to me, the most interesting thing that came from the GM meetings was what wasn't said. I think when you look at the Arizona situation, the league had a carte blanche opportunity right in front of them to say definitively the Coyotes are staying at Mullet Arena next season, regardless of whatever happens with this June auction date. Why did they stop short of saying that? My belief is because they're working on contingencies behind the scenes that may involve, pulling up stakes and relocating this team before we even get to that June date. I think not only is there skepticism as to whether or not this Coyotes ownership group can pull it off and win the auction, but I think there's just a lack of faith in general about this Coyotes ownership group to then be the right group that leads this team forward, even if they could somehow magically get an arena built. So I think there's lots of concerns. And what might those contingencies be? This is not confirmed, but the speculation behind the scenes is that the NHL is weighing, or at least looking at the legalities or possibilities of how could we potentially claw back this franchise if we need to. And it's going to depend, of course, on the willingness of Alex Meruelo, the owner of the Coyotes. It's going to depend on, is he willing to play ball? Is he willing to step away? The thought process is that they'd essentially make him whole for every dollar that he's put into the team. The league would get the franchise back and then pull in a huge relocation fee from Salt Lake and Ryan Smith to then move the team there for next season. Now, again, this is speculation and not confirmed, but what the NHL is weighing is this going to be a fight? Is it worth fighting? Is it worth trying? What are the optics of trying to claw back our team? And then what happens in Arizona? How can we find a way to save face? And I think that's another interesting wrinkle here is if you do take the team back, or if Meruelo willingly gives you the team back in exchange for something, will the NHL go back to Arizona and say, hey, in a 5-year period of time, you get an arena, we will bring a new expansion team back to Arizona on the other end of this. And so there's a lot of moving parts to this. What we may ultimately see, as the NHL has already been committed in Arizona for 2+ decades now through thick and thin, they obviously don't want to leave. The easiest route possible is to just see this through. If he wins the auction and can actually build an arena, great. If not, then that gives you a full other year to then relocate, because Bill Daly, the deputy commissioner, did say that he thinks June is too late. They've run out of runway at that point to relocate. But in the meantime, over these next 60 to 75 days, they're weighing all the different possibilities to potentially step in and get this moving in another direction, quite literally.
I wonder what direction that is. And it's interesting that you brought that up, the idea of moving back to Arizona, because I really hadn't considered that. Like, I hadn't really thought about that. But that's really interesting. Another thing around the league that I saw you tweeting about, Frank, Sean Couturier and John Tortorella. We know John Tortorella really well in this market. The Sean Couturier situation in Philadelphia. What are your thoughts on that?
It feels unnecessary, and I feel like I've weighed in and taken John Tortorella to task a few times already on this situation. Here's the thing. I watch the Flyers closely. They're in my market. I've watched Sean Couturier closely for 12 years now. I know that he didn't play for the last 2, and he has not been at his best. That part is obvious. But I also know in watching this team that there were plenty of other players that John Tortorella could have picked out to sit first. And I get that the idea is to send the message. And it was really funny watching the responses to my tweet today, because people were saying, oh, like John Tortorella doesn't owe you or the media anything. And okay, fair. That's fine. That's not what my point is. When I talked about someone that demands accountability refuses to answer to any accountability. My point is, listen to Sean Couturier's comments. He says after being named captain 34 days ago that he doesn't like the way that he's been treated. His agent has said publicly that John Tortorella hasn't communicated with him. So one player and captain doesn't like the way that he's being handled and is not being told anything. And then 2, now for the second game in a row, John Tortorella is scratching his captain and refuses to answer any questions about it. Zero accountability on his part, who, oh, by the way, it's entirely hypocritical of someone that refuses to answer questions and doesn't feel any need to be held to that. Then, oh, by the way, as soon as he gets fired, runs right to ESPN and jumps on the panel, and did at TSN before that. Guy who doesn't feel any reason to answer the media, begs media for a job on other end. It's insane. But nonetheless, I think he doesn't owe it to us in the media, but I think he damn sure owes it to his player and his captain to explain the situation and why he's being scratched 2 games in a row in the middle of a playoff chase, let alone for someone who's been a pretty darn good player for the bulk of this season and has a Selke trophy.
Yep. And we saw Brandon Dubinsky, former Torts player, speak out on everything as well. That was on Twitter. Frank, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and we'll talk to you next week.
See you guys.
Canucks Conversation is live Monday through Friday, every weekday at 2 p.m. over on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and interact in the YouTube live chat every day with us, folks.